Okay, yeah. Good.
Yeah, let's go.
Toppen. Yes. So do we start? Good. Nice. So we start. Welcome everyone to our June edition of Impact Day. My name is Gabriela Rodriguez. I direct here at Impact Hub Stockholm. And today we're going to talk all things climate action, sustainable entrepreneurship, and the intersection with public policies. And for today, for this first session, I'm super excited to have Robin Rushdi Al-Sálehi with us. He's the founder of Vakansa. It's a platform that is redefining and repurposing the use of buildings. Robin, welcome. So happy that you're here, that you were able to join us. And yeah, how do you feel?
I'm fine. I'm really good. Excited. Thank you for
Good.
inviting me.
Yes, thank you for accepting. I've been chasing Robin
You have.
for some months, and
You
he's
have.
like, not yet, not yet. Like, but I'm so happy that you're here, that finally we get to have you, Robin. But the reason, I mean, besides Vakansa being such an interesting concept, I'm also interested to know about you and, I mean, your journey and just how you got here and where you are, how you became part of, became interested in these topics about creating more sustainable cities. And but let's go a little bit back and just like, if you can tell us a bit about your story, your journey, what got you into this topic of repurposing and like what sparked your light of, okay, I want to make a difference in our urban landscapes and how our urbanizations work at the moment. So yeah, so if you can just tell us a
Sure,
bit about
sure. I'm raised here in Stockholm. I lived in a suburb called Rinkeby, and then I moved to another suburb called, well, it's sometimes it has the name of Arabdalen, which means Arab Valley. So a suburb where a lot of Arabs used to live there. There are not a lot of Arabs left, I think, but a suburb, like many suburbs in Sweden. And before I knew the term social sustainability, I at least experienced a lot of social unsustainableness in the suburbs. The quality of life, unemployment, my friends that perhaps didn't have a good uprising in or a period in school. They didn't do as well as perhaps I did. I went to a private school in the city and commuted every day. I actually did even count how many days I've been commuting when I went to school in the city. But they didn't. They went to the local school and didn't get the same possibilities as I got. So I've experienced a lot of social unsustainableness, and this triggered me into becoming more interested in, well, how the politics, how does our cities work? Why is this place so deprived compared to other places just 50 meters, 100 meters away? Why is this suburb in the worst conditions, and you have a villa area or residential area with a lot of villas and suites, mostly, where you have considerable amount of possibilities that we didn't have, and my friends didn't have. So this sparked me. The social injustices sparked my interest and my my drive, and I went on and studied city planning in Uppsala. I moved to Uppsala, been living there for the past 10 years, and studied city planning and sustainable development. Yeah, that's how it all started, at least.
Yes. And you mentioned, okay, social injustices, and then how, yeah, I mean, all topics around social sustainability and then what it means before even knowing the concept. But you felt that there was this kind of inequality and just like why these areas, yes, why these people, yes, why not us, or why, you know.
Effects of segregation, yeah.
Yes. And what was, in a way, so you started studying in this topic, but what was also, was it like people or a person in particular or a network that you joined that you decided to go to the path perhaps to how one can affect in public policies or in entrepreneurship, or where did you start your path?
Well, I think I understood in a very early age that city planning is very political, and how politics decide pretty much everything. And I read a book that is called The Rise and Fall of Great American Cities. I think I recited that right, but anyways, by a author called Jane Jacobs. She's a city planning guru, and she describes her observations of New York in her book in a phenomenal way, and really, it really got to me, because everything she described is things that I think everyone can see in their cities. And that book gave me the tools I needed to understand, well, is this part of the city designed for us, or are we designed for this part of the city? So are we happy in this part of the city? Are we using the parks in this part of the city? Are there pavements for people, or are there just, parking lots for cars? Are there playing grounds for kids? Ways for elderly people to actually move about?
Yeah.
Or is it designed for a specific type of class? And that book actually, I used this book for both of my essays during university. So in university, you do a B essay and a C essay when you take your exam, and I used it all the time. And this also triggered me into doing something about my new residential city. So and part residential
in Uppsala.
So
yes.
in Uppsala, so in Uppsala, I lived in a place called Flugsta, and it's a typical residential area, and I think everyone can relate when I say that a lot of our cities are built in a functionalistic way, and this is something that Jane Jacobs describes in her book. So in the modern city, we live in one place, go to work in another place, go to school in a third place, buy what we need in a fourth place, and spend our spare time in a fifth place, and we commute between all of these places. When you look at an old town, all of these places are in the same place.
In a square.
In a square.
Yes.
In a very restricted area. And the old city type, or the old city planning was it's called multifunctional, where you have all the functions in the same place. In the new city, you don't have that because we want to. During the 60s, we started building out metros. We've had railroads, but metros, for example, in Stockholm, but also car lanes. Cars got introduced in a dramatic way during the 60s. Everything was supposed to be focused on cars and car lanes, and this created this functionalistic city. And so in order to do something about this functionalistic city, you have to create new functions. So in my residential area, we had a lot of facilities on the bottom floors of the houses, but no one used them. Or they were used sometimes for an association or dances or whatever.
You mean like meeting spots or common areas?
No. I mean facilities. There were facilities in the high rises where I lived, but they were never used, and so our residential areas were sleeping areas. People went there to sleep and did their dishes or whatever, and cooked their food. But then they were going out. They were working there or going to school there. And so I decided to do something about it. I talked to a association that had a facility in the same high rise where I lived, but they weren't using the facility all of the hours of the day. So I told them, well, I can use this area. I'll rent it from you. We'll share the expense of the facility, but I'll use it during the day. And I started my first community center. So going from a functionalistic way of seeing things, just using this high rise for sleeping, try to use it in other ways. And I decided to start a community center. And this was back in 2015, I think. And this community center was a success. It went really well. And
how did you start it? Like, what did it mean for you to create a community center? What kind of interactions did you want to make, or what drive you to create a community center for everything that could be used that space for? Why a community center?
Well, I think I saw that in these residential, in these high rises, there were a lot of students. I think there are 16 high rises in this very, very concentrated part of the city called Flugsta, and I think there were about 2,000 students living there, but no one used the area. Everyone was in their dorms, and I wanted to create a meeting place for all of these students. A lot of students they were living there for perhaps just one semester or 2 semesters or 3 years or 5 years, depending on their studies. But there were no meeting places. All of the meeting places were in town. And I think myself, I experienced loneliness. I heard people experiencing loneliness. A lot of students from abroad that meet Swedish people and perhaps don't connect with them because Swedes are as they are.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
So there were like all these little different factors that piled up to, this is a thing that we actually need.
Yeah. And it's a human. It's cultural, but so it's cultural factors, and I wanted to create a space for these people. So I just started it, really.
Yes.
But I did actually. I was part of a competition that Länsförsäkringarna had, an insurance company here in Sweden, and I did get a grant to do this.
Okay.
Because the competition was about not safety, but trygghet in other words.
Safety.
I think it's safety. Yeah.
The feeling of feeling safe I guess. So,
yeah, and yeah,
Trygghet,
the
yeah.
sense of safety, or
Yeah.
yeah. Anyways, and this was a um, one of the applications that got this grant, and I started the community center, and we had lots of activities. We had board game evenings. We had Game of Thrones sessions when Game of Thrones was big. So we did lots of activities. Um,
So I think in a way, so
art
far,
events, etc. And this one of the girls in the board game association, she was also part of TED Talk in Uppsala,
okay.
and I was just talking with her, like I'm talking with you, just about my ideas and I guess passion and everything.
Yes.
And I think it was the third or fourth time they were there. She was like, "Don't you want to do a TED Talk or TEDx in Uppsala?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah, sure, why not?" And so 2016, I did a TEDx where I tried to what's it called?
Like compile or to
Compile,
put all this-
comprimate perhaps everything that all of my thoughts in this TEDx. So it's out there on YouTube if you want to check it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was 1 year after you started this
Yeah,
community
yeah.
center, and I was gonna mention that, like, to everything that you've been speaking about from your journey, from your background, for where you lived, where you what you saw in your community, in your local society,
Yeah.
both with your friends, your family, but also the kind of opportunities available within your, I don't know, 5 kilometers radio.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then from the aspect of this cultural and what the urban landscape offered once you moved out from this where you grew up.
Yeah.
Um, it seems that all these different factors, in a way, kind of define a bit of or like the spirit behind Vakansa, I would say, in a
Yeah,
way.
definitely.
Or is it?
Definitely. So the multifunctional way of looking at buildings is what in the end triggered me into actually
Yes.
founding Vakansa. And Vakansa is a facilities sharing platform.
Yes. Tell us a bit. When did it start, Vakansa?
It started as an idea. I think it started already when I did the community center in
Okay.
Klokstad. And when I did the TEDx, I presented a term that I've created that is called time vacancy. So when we talk
Okay.
about facilities, we talk about them as being filled or vacant, but that's not really true. There is also something I call time vacancy, which is the time when a tenant that has a facility isn't using that facility. So it could be during the evenings, during the weekends, or perhaps during the day, like with the association. They were only using the space for evenings, but not during the day. And that's called a time vacancy, if we use my term for it. And these time vacancies were, I mean, there are a lot of time vacancies in our cities. There are a lot of facilities in our cities that are, wholly or partly vacant. And with the facilities that are partly vacant, that's where Vakansa comes into play, because what we have today is a marketplace where existing tenants that have facilities, for example, Impact Hub, could put out their list their facilities on our platform and just rent them out, the facilities, when you don't need your facilities. So during the evenings or weekends or semesters or whatever, vacations, I mean. And that's how Vakansa started.
But you not only focus on office spaces.
No.
It's buildings.
Yeah.
in general.
When we started before the pandemic. A lot of things happened during the pandemic, but when I founded Vakansa, this was back in summer of 2019. I was working as a chief sustainability officer in Uppsala at a real estate company, but decided to seek grants again. We love Sweden because
Yes.
there are a lot of grants here. A Vinnova grant. So it's the state-owned innovation center, the institution.
Yes.
We got a grant to create our first MVP, or the beta platform, really. And when we started, we were focusing a lot on associations, NGOs, and other organizations that perhaps don't have the budget of actually taking a facility of their own and signing a contract for 3, 5, or even perhaps 1 year. But they need a facility, some hours of the day or some times of the week, during the week.
A stable place.
A stable place, still a place for them that they can use and share with others. And that's what we work with.
And where are you now? Like Vakansa so it's a digital platform.
Yeah.
And then it's connecting those that are building owners or those that have these facilities that have the time vacancy within their spaces. And I mean, what have you seen so far? What Vakansa, like, did it turn out the way that you are, or is it turning out the way? Have you made shifts from the initial vision?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit, walk us through that.
We've definitely pivoted a couple of times, but I still think it's safe to say that the original idea still works, or even works better now. So before the pandemic, we did a couple of matches between associations and organizations that have had time vacancies and were seeking time vacancies, and almost all of those organizations still co-use facilities to this day. So 4 years later, almost, they're still co-using the space. The space is matched. But during the pandemic, or just before the pandemic, I was doing a lot of matches, but then the restrictions came and no one wanted to share facilities because of the restrictions. We were home. We couldn't use facilities. So Vakansa had to pivot. And what I saw, coming back to this, the functionalistic city, what happened during the pandemic is that our sleeping areas, our residential areas, suddenly became the center, the center point of our lives, but also our, all of the things that we do in life. We worked from home. We bought things from home. We had spare time activities from home. We played a lot of Catan, the board game. I love it. Still love it. It's a couple of days, times each week, every week. And so the residential areas became these multifunctional areas, not in function, because the built environment was still only for residential purposes, but people use them in other ways. So the pivoting I did was that I started talking to property owners that owned residential areas and talked to them about their going back to the community center in Flugsta. The idea wise to use their facilities on the bottom floors that rarely are used because there are no people there during the day. Or earlier that was the case. So we started. We talked to a couple of property owners, and I got a cooperation with a company called Stockholmshem, and opened our first work / spare time hub, community center. I just call it a community center. People could use it in different ways. So that was how we pivoted because we couldn't do matchings. We opened our own community center.
Okay.
So that's doing a full circle,
But-
going
but-
back.
Yeah, and I mean, I find it so fascinating because again, the word functional comes into like the view whenever you're referencing about Jacobson.
Jane Jacobs. Yeah.
Jane Jacobs. Sorry, I've every urban developer that I like spoke to. Jane Jacobs is like, yes, everyone.
She's the
refers to her.
guru.
Yes, she's the guru.
Yeah.
But yes, absolutely. Like going back to this functional aspect of cities and livable cities. But
Yeah.
now this new shift of way of living, it became multifunctional. We were forced
Yeah.
to be multifunctional wherever we were, both how you're saying, working, living, eating, everything. And so when you make this shift and then this new perspective of, oh, yes, so in order to create a sustainable city, actually the pandemic in a way nudged society to be more flexible in how we view public spaces, urban spaces, buildings.
Yeah.
So now with this said, we passed this aspect of the pandemic, but we still have in us ingrained that yes, we are able to work from everywhere, or we're able to use spaces and be creative about it.
Yeah.
So how, knowing that now, how it is like shifting for you for Vakansa, and perhaps you and your personal view on what a sustainable city is, and how would that shift in your vision for Vakansa? How does that,
I think
incorporates
when it comes to the local community centers, in some parts of the cities, we had 3 that we opened up in 6 months. One of them didn't work out. One worked kind of good, but in the end we didn't have really good cooperation with that property owner, so it didn't really work out. But in the third one, it went really well, no problems at all. So I think the effects of the pandemic and the community centers, or the multifunctional way of thinking, I think the property owners that really understood that this is an important thing to work on, and in order to make a specific area more attractive, I think in those parts it did work out. In the other parts it didn't, and there are a lot of reports about this as well. From the Swedish Property Association, for example, a real estate association. But what happened when the pandemic, and more thing about that as well, what happened during the pandemic was that a lot of people started talking about the 15-minute city, 10-minute city, perhaps 1-minute city, and from a sustainability point of view, using something multifunctionally is more resource efficient than using it functionally. Because what happens is that you use different parts of the city or different buildings or facilities during certain hours of the day, and then it's completely empty. Going back to Vakansa, the time vacancies. And so I think there are perhaps a couple of property owners that understand this and try to do something about it. Some, they don't really value that kind of creative work, or working with that idea in mind. Would
you say that when you think about a city, functional, with the definition of functional, is very linear?
It is,
right? Because it's how you're
going
saying,
from point A to point B, and that's it's not a very human way of looking at the cities, and that's why also when I did the TEDx, the title of it was, are the cities meant for us, or are we meant for cities? Are we adapting ourselves in all ways possible in order to increase the value of different parts of the cities, or different properties, because that's what in the end matters for property owners. We could come back to that if we want to, but that's a separate discussion. But to your point, or to your question, after the pandemic, I decided, well, to not pursue the community centers as hard, because establishing community centers, as you know yourself, it's time consuming and it's hard to scale. And the reason I started Vakansa was to create this platform, this marketplace, in order to make it possible for any tenant to start sharing their facilities with others. And the reason for that is that, I mean, the sustainability reason of it, if you put on that layer as well, is that if we can fill the existing square meters that we have built already, I think there are about 30 million square meter office spaces in Sweden. If you look at the government, the government-owned or rented facilities in Sweden, that's approximately 90 million square meters.
Okay.
So there are a lot of square meters.
Yeah.
We don't have there is no lack of square meters in this country. That's a farce. That's just a made up, illusion. It's an illusion. It's a structural problem. And if we can start fill these spaces out, we perhaps don't have to build and construct anything else. And why is that? Because the reason for saying that is because the most sustainable building is the one that never has to be built.
Yes.
And we do have today a problem with a structure that doesn't understand that we live in a finite world with finite resources, and resources that has to be shared. That aspect goes back to a lot of the social injustices and social problems that we have today, because that's also an issue that is related to the question of resource and how resources are shared, distributed. So and that's also why I work in the real estate sector, because if you can control or do something about the built environment where we live, where we do everything in our lives, or at least I think it's like 50+% of the human population live in urban areas. If we can control or do something about that built environment, we can solve a lot of problems. A lot of problems when it comes to the resource consumption in the world, energy, social injustices, a lot of things. So the real estate sector is, I would argue that it's the key to solving a lot of the sustainability issues that we have in the world.
This is so fascinating, because when one thinks about real estate, you would, how you're saying, it's the physical infrastructure, but one would think it's only like this, how do you say, like vacant spaces, or just building buildings, period. But no, but there's so much that it can, that it affects, both in terms of how people move, what people have access to, how people thrive as well, but how we also affect our environment. And I mean, yes, definitely. So most of the resources are being consumed by urbanized areas.
Yeah, I mean, cities are fundamentally resource-consuming entities.
Yes,
cities wouldn't be constructed if there were no resources. So making sure that cities don't consume resources in an unsustainable way, or trying to make them more circular with the resources that they've already extracted
Already
is key.
Yes.
Otherwise, they will just expand, and you would continue just consume and everything. So that's the aggregated level, going from like a small startup, focusing on sharing space,
Yes.
to this really big question of how do you use buildings, how do you use our spaces, and how can we use our cities more resource efficiently.
So that leads me to my last question, because how you're saying, Vakansa is very, it's niche, this focus is clear, the objective of it, and it's a business at the end of the day, or it's like business driven, but with an impact, business with an impact. However, you mentioned that we need to be involved in how public policies also function on our everyday life. They have a big impact on how we live in cities. So if we relate, how is Vakansa? How are you nudging, let's say, on the policy side with Vakansa? Are you actively doing something as well with Vakansa, using Vakansa like flag, or using Vakansa's purpose to?
I mean, we talked a bit about it earlier. I mean, I do definitely have a activistic vein as well. And I think activism and entrepreneurship is quite closely related, actually. And well, the activistic point of view when it comes to Vakansa is, as I said, there is an underlying agenda where we try to change or try to change the view of some policies and some structures that are there. Today, when it comes to renting out space, when a property owner rents out a space to a tenant, the law says you can only rent it out to one tenant. And there are a lot of VAT rules and stuff like that. We don't need to go into that, but there are structures that we need to change. Laws, rules, regulations that don't encourage sharing, but encourages ownership. And and it's the ownership today that we need to do something about, because when we go through our cities, we don't really think about the buildings. I think people almost look at buildings as if they are mountains. They're just there. They've always been there, and it's like, but these mountains are owned by someone. Big interests, big pension funds, big owners, and we need to change their playing field of how to manage the buildings, own the buildings, etc. So that's somewhere an underlying agenda I have. But going to the more activistic point of view, I mean, Vakansa is a business. We take a commission from every matchmaking we do between tenants and the sharing that we create. But I've also 1 year ago, almost, I read a book about Jane Jacobs again, a biography about her called Wrestling with Moses. Robert Moses was a master builder, master architect in New York that she was fighting against. He wanted to build these big lanes and demolish a lot of buildings in order to do these grandiose, projects in New York. And he did some, but he didn't manage to do other because of her and the people she encouraged into these activism. But after I read this book about her activism, I decided to do my own campaign. And the campaign directly translated is hug the building, or så krama byggnaden. And the campaign was about pinpointing the problem that we have today, where property owners have a right in Swedish law. They have a right to demolish buildings, and that's quite unsustainable to demolish a building, especially if it's actually functioning. You could just perhaps repurpose it or take care of it, or but there is a way of taking care of buildings today where a lot of property owners just let it crumble and they don't deteriorate and they don't manage it. That it's a system. It's a systematic way of managing buildings where they practically don't manage it at all. And the reason for that is that if they can show the politicians or the municipality that it costs too much to take care of this building or to repurpose it or manage it, they will have an easier way of actually getting a demolition permit. And why do they want to demolish it? It's because when you construct a building, you set a rent on this building, and that rent is quite fixed if you don't do some repurposements or take care or do renovations and stuff like that. But an even better way of doing it is to demolish it and set a new rent that is market price for that particular year. So if you've built something during the 70s, it's one rent. Yeah. It's quite cheap. So in Stockholm, Stockholm City, it's perhaps 3,000 kronor per square meter per year. That's the term. Yeah. And if you demolish a building today and construct a new building in Stockholm, you could perhaps put 6,000, 8,000, perhaps even 10,000 kronor per square meter per year, and you could practically almost double the value of a building. And it's the value of the building that property owners care most about, not that the building is actually being used. And that's where you get to the problem of cities not being adapted to us people, but we are adapting ourselves to them, to the economic the equations.
Can you repeat that part? So the interest is not exactly that the building is being used.
No.
But that is not being used, but it's there and it's just growing.
Yeah,
its economic
property
value
owners can make a profit of a building that is not being rented out, because what they profit from is the value increase of the property
over time, and
so you don't need to rent anything.
Yes,
and I mean, if you look at the stock market or the market, the biggest market in the world is the property market.
Yes.
And there are, have you heard about, I think it's called Evergreen, I think it's called Evergreen or Everglade or something. There's a big property developer in China that has built
and there
lots
it's like
of buildings.
Ghost town.
It's there are ghost cities.
Yes.
I think it was last I saw like 85 million apartments vacant.
Yeah.
Because it's a stock, it's a value. People have been putting their money into this property developer that is constructing buildings and profiting from that value increase. What is happening now is that they are demolishing a lot of these buildings in order to sustain the value because of inflation and the global economy today. But that's a really, really big problem. It's a taking, making, and dumping. The linear economy is the fundamental pillar of the property sector today in Sweden and in the world.
Yes. Wow. So I think to be mindful of everyone's time, I want to, because this is such an interesting topic in terms of how you say, I mean, you really raise a big concern here of like, who are the cities for, who are designing our cities. And in a way, we touch upon part of like the takeaways of this conversation is like being a social or having a social enterprise, of course, with being a business oriented as well, but also having this aspect of caring and creating like sustainable businesses, not only long lasting, but also that can generate like a positive impact where they're being developed. So key strategies that you are, just as the last question for you, having this in mind in terms of this linear economy and how our cities are being functioning as of now. What's your vision for Vakansa in the long run of how do you want to play this role within your own ecosystem? How do you want to affect it? What's your long-lasting vision for it?
So just the last point with Krama Byggnaden. I mean, the purpose of the campaign is to create or to have a what's it called, moratorium? Can you say that in English?
Moratorium.
It's like a
You know what?
forbud.
Like to forbid.
Yeah, to forbid, exactly. It's perhaps seeing some kind of forbidding.
Yes,
you
like
can't say that.
stopping or making it illegal.
You know, exactly. Rules on stopping demolitions.
Yes.
That's the purpose of the campaign. Because if we don't stop the demolitions, we won't be able to stop the economic engine of the property sector.
Yes.
So that's the purpose of the campaign. With Vakansa, as I said, my vision is to create a sustainable development where we meet people's needs and organizations' needs for facilities without constructing any new buildings. So that's the vision.
Yeah.
If we can fill the needs in the existing building stock, then I will be really happy. I mean, that's the goal.
Yeah.
And this is a goal and a vision and a platform that could go internationally because this problem is everywhere.
Yeah.
So that's the vision of Vakansa.
It's a city
And
problem.
I'd say the goal as well, coming back to the human part of the human part of it, is that our goal is to make sure that no association, no NGO, no company, no organization has to stand or fall and disappear because of a facility, because there are enough square meters for everyone. We just need to find ways of making them available for everyone.
Yeah.
So that's the goal. No, every organization should see the light of the day and have a place to be
Should have
at.
a place.
Yeah.
Yes. Great. Robin, thank you so much. And
Thank you.
Vakansa.se.
Exactly,
As a platform?
vakansa.se. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. I mean,
Thank you.
thank you so much. Do you guys have any question? A question for Robin? We can have
Someone here perhaps,
clear?
because my neck is
like
really stiff now.
Okay. Well, please stick around, Robin. Stay for a little while throughout the day. And thank you so much. We're going to take a 5 minutes break. We're going to continue with our conversations. We have our next session is the Impact Leadership Series hosted by Global Shapers, the Stockholm Hub. So, yes, stick around. Thank you so much. Thank you, Robin. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Okay, we can get going here on the stage. Welcome anyone who wants to join in and talk about climate policy and impact. All right. Okay, welcome to this Impact Leadership Series event. We host this together with the Impact Hub on Impact Day once a month, and we have a guest. And when I say we, I mean Global Shapers community in Stockholm, which is a kind of like a youth network connected to the World Economic Forum that exists similar to the Impact Hub exists in around 400 cities for us in the world, and we run projects locally. And it's a volunteer organization, and that's why it's so fun to partner with Impact Hub for this. And my name is Karolina, and this is Kajsa, and she's our guest today. And hello! And we're going to talk about, as it says on the event, we're going to talk about climate policy and impact. And I couldn't think of a better person to invite than you, Kajsa. And it will be obvious when we talk during this event. So basically, we're going to start thinking a little bit. We're going to start from the future and looking back, and then we're going to walk down the topics that we're here to talk about, climate policy and impact, and then we're going to sort of reflect from today on to the future. So we're gonna start with some nostalgia, and you guys, you're head of section at the international division at the climate unit at the Ministry for Climate and Enterprise, right? Yes, that's right. And I would describe you as a force of nature, but also a force for nature, and that will be obvious, I think, when we talk, because you not only work on climate today in your career, but you've made you've made a real impression, I think, for anyone working in the climate space as someone who really you really walk the talk and you live your values. For instance, you've taken a ship from the US to Sweden just to keep your carbon footprint down, and that I think in itself is says a lot about you. And you obviously today work at the ministry on UNFCCC COP questions in the day-to-day. So just to get an idea of, what you're of now and looking back at the today from the future, if you would look back at the chapter of your life right now, what do you think you would be nostalgic about? Just a glimpse into that.
Good question, and thank you for that introduction. It's very sweet to hear you say that. Hard question, but I think hopefully I will continue with all my train rides and sustainable travel, so that's not something to be nostalgic about, because I think I'm going to continue doing it. But I think having colleagues from across the world, which I have in my work now, and really having my closest colleagues in the Pacific or the Caribbean is quite a unique work life, and that's something that when I stop doing this job, I'm sure I'm gonna miss it quite a lot.
Yeah, I really that must be amazing to have that also when you work with a question that is global, right? So that you can actually connect on something that is as pressing for all of you, but from different perspectives, of course. Okay, so more about you, Kajsa. You ended up. Should I take the mic? No. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So more about sort of what led you to where you are today. I mean, who is Kajsa, and what has your life been like leading up to now working with climate? Tell us more about you.
I'm born and raised in Stockholm, and I first came to, I was quite young when I started being passionate about climate change. I watched, like many, the Al Gore movie, An Inconvenient Truth. And then I was completely shocked how serious climate change is, and how not everyone was doing everything they could all the time about climate change. And then I kind of decided, I think I was in 6th grade then, and I decided, like, from now on, I'm going to dedicate my life to contributing to the fight against climate change. And I have done so ever since. I've studied quite a lot in both in Lund and in London, both on policy and climate questions and environmental questions. Always been active in different types of civil society organizations on climate change or on other topics, but trying to make them more on climate change. And then what really led me to this job, I think I was always curious about the UN process and thought that if climate change is a global question, so it makes most sense to deal with it at a global level. And I think when the Paris Agreement was agreed, I was in Paris, kind of watching it from the side, following it as a student organization at that time. And then I got some really hope to the process and to the UN to be able to deliver on climate change. And after that, I applied to become the Swedish youth delegate to the climate negotiations. And then I completely fell in love with that work. And then after my studies, I started working with that.
Yeah, I can kind of see how you were like, okay, so climate change is the biggest issue that the world has. I wonder what the world is doing about this. And then you can, okay, it turns out it's a UNFCCC process. Turns out it's COP, so that must be a very clear process. So that must be such a well-resourced thing because it's so important. And then sort of almost investigating so what is this like? What is this like? And getting closer and closer, and then actually being in the middle of it now. So now being in the middle of it, what does a day in the life of Kajsa look like?
I think it looks very different depending on which day it is. I'm quite often traveling with my work. So last week and for 17 days in a row, I was in Bonn, which is a place where I very often go to, a small city in Germany, but that is also the headquarters of the UNFCCC, so the UN Climate Secretariat. And there we had the annual kind of technical climate negotiations. So every year there's a COP, but there's also every year a meeting in June where all the technical negotiators meet and try to solve as much as possible before the COP, so that the ministers at COP can deal with the kind of important political things that we can't solve at a technical level. So I was there for 17 days, and then a normal day would be starting quite early, eating breakfast at a hotel together with your colleagues from the Swedish delegation, but also from across the world. Then going off to Swedish delegation meeting, in the conference center, then going off to EU coordination in the morning, going away to coordination meeting with your small subgroup of the EU colleagues on the same topic. I'm on adaptation and loss and damage, so then I speak closely to my colleagues on those topics. Then you go away to your negotiation team, you plan for the day, and if there's come any new texts that you have to react to during the days in the negotiation, you analyze them, you read them through together. And then you have some bilaterals with colleagues from other countries and other groups in the negotiations. So I speak for the EU on one topic, while other groups are the least developed countries, for example, as a group, or the small island states as a group. Then you go off and talk to the negotiators from those groups and discuss what they see as the key issues, what they think about the new text that you might have gotten. Then you go off to the negotiations, and then you sit there for hours and hours discussing wordings and commas and texts. Sometimes you end at 7 o'clock in the evening, sometimes you end at 11, and sometimes even 4 o'clock in the night. And you sit and discuss with these colleagues on how to find ways forward and how you can agree on a text together.
And so everyone is so concentrated on this text. And are there times when you just feel like, it's just a text, or do you feel like, no, we need that comma there?
Yeah, I think it varies. Sometimes you really feel very strongly, we need that comma there, or we don't need that comma there. And you're very passionate about some things because they can mean so much in how this is going to be interpreted. But sometimes you can, in the end, you're always like, okay, that's fine. If you got in the key things in there, then the rest of the text might not be as important. But I think sometimes a comma can make all the difference.
So now that you're in the sort of microcosm of this, what do you feel like? Is it what you expected it would be like?
Yeah, I think it is. It is really, you see the kind of how there's so many different interests in the world, so many different ideas of what is the best way forward. And it's really fun, it's really intense, and it's very, very nerdy on the text and the paragraph and the decision references, but at the same time, really important issues at hand.
And do you feel like the media outcomes after this reflects what it was like on the inside often, or do you feel like it's kind of alien from what you experienced on the inside?
No, that's a very good question. Often I'm actually quite struck of how different the media can portray one of the meetings from what you actually experience in the negotiations. And that really makes me realize how untransparent the process is, because I think it's really hard for someone from the outside, even if you're there, even if you follow all the formal meetings. There's so many informal meetings, corridor talks, and smaller and smaller groups that meet and discuss the key issues. And sometimes that is not really communicated, what the agreements are and how you reach different agreements. So I would say the overall picture is generally the true in media, but many of the details or topics might be lost. For example, at COP27, we had a lot of media saying that Sweden was blocking an issue in the EU, and none of us knew where that came from at all, because that wasn't true at all. And then we go and we try to figure out, like, how has this rumor come about and started becoming something that people write about in media.
Okay. And do you feel like that's a... How much of a problem is that in the corridors when everyone reads something in the news and it's like, does it become true, or do people on the inside just know that, nah, this can just be out of hand sometimes?
I think no one really has time to read media during these conferences, but then you come home afterwards or you discuss with your family what they have read when you were gone. So it's more a reflection afterwards of how kind of the outcomes are portrayed.
Yeah. So for anyone here who would like to know more about what it is really like on the inside, would you have any recommendation for what media to follow, or kind of what kind of approach to have to this?
No, I think as with everything, to follow different sources.
Yeah.
I also think that media is, because the conferences are becoming bigger and bigger, the understanding of them are also becoming better and better. So I think with every conference, I think it's more detailed reporting. Also from Swedish media, I think it becomes more and more to the nitty-gritty details of the negotiations. I also think there's specialized organizations that work with conveying news from the negotiations during the different negotiation sessions. If you're at the conference, there's every day this magazine being produced by civil society organizations that they hand out in the mornings, and it's been around since I think 1972. And it's quite accurate always, and they really follow that. They interview negotiators to really understand the different processes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was all the result of the question, what's a day in the life like? And I felt like that was a really interesting day. So before we start talking about climate impact and policy, I also want to hear about a day in the life on the cargo ship.
A day in the life of the cargo ship. So this is the cargo ship I went from the US to UK with, and then I took the train from UK back home. I'm a very social person, and I knew I was going to be alone on this boat. There's staff there, of course, but not with anyone I knew. So I had this kind of very rigorous schedule that I was following every day. I don't remember all the details of when I did what, but I know I did some exercise every day. There was a treadmill. I did some yoga. I had this report to write on my internship that I did a little bit on every day. There were two other passengers on this cargo ship. There was one 85-year-old and one 80-year-old from Canada and from the US. So I would walk around the cargo ship 2 laps together with them every day. And it took quite some time because they weren't the fastest ones. And we would also sit and discuss different topics in the dining room, and then I would sit and look at the waves for some hours every day.
That sounds pretty good. That sounds amazing, especially with the company and the waves. But what led them to take this cargo ship?
They were radio amateurs, so they were in this community about broadcasting radio, and they wanted to send a radio signal from the middle of the Atlantic because that would grant them some kind of point in their radio community. So they decided to do this trip just to be able to do that, and then they didn't succeed, which was quite sad, but they were happy anyway.
Oh, okay. I didn't expect that to be why they took the ship. Okay, amazing. Okay, so let's talk about climate. I mean, working with it every day. What do you feel has been? What do you feel now after Bonn is the thing that you look to COP 28 in UAE to be like, this is what I hope for it. This is my realistic but optimistic hope for it.
I think my biggest hope is that it's going to come something strong on the need for emission reduction and mitigation from Dubai. And I don't know how closely you followed what happened in Bonn, but we had the EU had put forward an agenda item on the mitigation work program, which is a program where we're going to have different meetings and events and discuss the importance of emission reduction, how to do it in different sectors, and learn from each other on how to accelerate emission reduction. For us, it was clear that that was going to be on the agenda for this meeting, but others did not agree with us. So we spent the first 8 days of the meeting in Bonn. Out of 2 weeks, we spent 8 days, if I remember correctly, arguing about whether or not that would be a part of the agenda or not. And in the end, we couldn't get an agenda if we insisted more on having it there. So in the end, we had the discussions on mitigations. We captured them in an informal note, but it was never a part of the formal process, which was very unfortunate. So my hope is that the world is going to wake up a little bit more coming to Dubai, and that we're going to have some strong outcomes on both on the mitigation work program then, which is kind of this knowledge exchange and how can we encourage each other to work more strongly on mitigation, but also have some really strong political signals on the need to phase out fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And I do think there's room to be able to agree on such things in Dubai. And then we also, Dubai is going to be the first time we have the global stocktake, which is kind of the review of the Paris Agreement. So every 5 years, it's going to be a review of the Paris Agreement. This first one was lagged a few years to give us time to start understanding the Paris Agreement and working on it. But now we're going to, for the first time, review the Paris Agreement. We're going to see how does countries' commitment pair up with the 1.5 degree target in the Paris Agreement. What do we need to course correct to make sure that we actually deliver on what we promised? And then based on the outcomes of this review, the global stocktake, countries are going to update their own national determined contribution to the Paris Agreement. So they're going to hopefully then update their national ambition to represent what the outcome of this review is. So it's really kind of the stress test of the Paris Agreement to see if it works.
Okay, and what's your feeling? Do you think that, this is going to feel like ripping something up and it might actually change? Or like, what's your feeling about that? Because that's, in the big scheme of things, it's kind of a big deal to do it.
Yeah. It's really a big deal. I really hope that countries are going to ramp up their ambition in their national determined contribution, and they have to. It's said very clearly in the Paris Agreement that the next one you hand in has to be higher than the old one, and you have to hand in one after the global stocktake. So I put all my hope on that.
Okay, so and looking back at the first COP that you went to when you were a youth delegate, and today, do you feel like, is there something that you feel has really sort of leapfrog into a much, much better discussion, more, better? And is there something that you feel like, whoa, are we still discussing this?
Yeah, good. That's a really good question. I had lots of conversation with my colleagues about has this process developed when we keep on discussing whether or not to have mitigation on the agenda? It almost feels like you're moving backwards in a sense. But I do think the Paris Agreement changed this whole process, and I think it's very clear what the common ambition is in a sense. But the kind of mitigation discussion is perhaps a little bit the same as it was at the first COP I went to. Something that really has developed is the question that I'm following and that I'm negotiating on behalf of the EU, which is the question of climate-related loss and damage. That was really kind of a question on the sidelines when I started following the process. And now it's become one of the major discussions in these conferences of how are we going to help the most vulnerable countries to respond to the impacts of climate change. And at COP27, we agreed to establish a funding arrangements, including a fund to help countries respond to loss and damage. So it's really become this major political thing, which I also think is a big recognition to those that are most vulnerable and to the islands that are sinking because of sea level rise. Yeah. So that's something that really has developed.
So could you say that proxy for that is that those countries now have a stronger voice in these conversations as well, or do you feel like that there's other players? Sort of how has the sort of political landscape changed in terms of who that has a strong voice? I think that's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they have a very strong voice. I think everyone that goes to these conferences will hear the small island states speak quite strongly and clearly in the conference. So that's definitely something. Then I think it's also double in a sense, because you know that there are some really strong players that only want to hinder the process and slow it down. They seldom speak themselves in the open formats, but they make other groups go and speak on their behalf, which is unfortunate. For example, there is this group called the like-minded developing countries. That was the group that at this meeting did not want to see mitigation on the agenda. And they gathered quite a big group of countries to argue against increased ambition, basically. And sometimes they also make sure that we can't focus on the most vulnerable, but it has to be for that you can't like target the small island states or the least developed countries with different finance or funding. You have to focus on a much broader group of countries, and so I think they have also quite a strong voice.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that's becomes difficult when you don't really know sort of the source up front. So if we jump to the policies then, sort of now that you of course, Sweden has its own agenda, it has its own hopes for the policies to go through and so on. But like, is there any policy that you has become kind of your favorite policy, maybe apart from the sort of loss and damage package and so on? But like, if all the countries you had a magic wand, they would all implement this, what would you feel like this would be the one with a huge impact?
I think the easy reply to that is carbon pricing. I think it's I think it's by many evaluated as one of the absolute most effective tools to reduce emissions, to actually put a price on carbon. I think in Sweden we do have that. You can discuss if it's higher enough. In the EU we have our emission trading scheme, which is many times kind of highlighted as the greatest example of an emission trading system. Then you can discuss whether or not the cap is too low or too high to actually drive that change. But I think if all countries would have that, we would have much lower emissions. But then if I can add one more, I also think climate adaptation, like preparing our societies to climate change and building resilience, is another key policy that unfortunately not enough countries have the time or the money or the resources to do. So I think if everyone would kind of implement climate change adaptation policies align with the climate adaptation policy cycle, which starts with kind of assessing your risks and your vulnerabilities, prioritizing what's most important to your community or your country, and then make a plan and then have a monitoring and evaluation on how you live up to that plan. I think if everyone would do that, we would also have a much more resilient world that could handle the impacts that we know are coming.
And I think often actors think of adaptation as like infrastructure, but it's really much more once I think you open the box and look into the options. So if we combine the three, climate, policy and impact, and sort of now reflecting on what you've experienced so far, has there been a time when you felt like, yes, we had an impact here, or I had an impact, Sweden has an impact? You've been part of something where like, yeah, this was impactful.
Yeah, I would say so. I think one of the examples that come to mind is from COP27, when we decided to establish this fund to help the most vulnerable countries to respond to loss and damage, which was a big outcome from the COP. And we had long discussions if this fund was needed or not for a long time, where the EU for a long time was of the view that it was not necessarily needed because it could be covered, the same type of finance could be channeled through other already existing funds. So we wouldn't have to create something new that also comes with extra costs. But then in the end, EU went out and said, okay, we can agree to it under certain conditions, that it's going to go to the most vulnerable, and that a broad range of donors are going to be a part of contributing to this, not necessarily only the usual suspects on who gives, but also the private sector and all countries in a position to do so with an economy that allows it. And we had long discussions then on this fund, how it would look like, who it was going to be for. And there's this long discussion in the process of who is a developing country and who is a developed country. And there is this list from 1992 that lists developed countries and developing countries. And many countries are very attached to that list because it lists countries such as Saudi Arabia as a developing country, which makes, if you base who gets money on that list, most countries in the world can get money as a developing country. And today we see that many of the climate funds we have, the majority of funding goes to China and not to Tuvalu or Nauru or the small island states. So there was a long discussion on who is going to get funding from this fund. Who is it really for? Some argued that it was supposed to be to all developing countries, according to this list. While we from the EU side said it's going to be for the most vulnerable. And then we had this long formulation, and there was even, is it supposed to be for all developing countries? Is it supposed to be for developing countries, comma, in particular the most vulnerable? Yes. Or is it to be for developing countries that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change? And I think both I felt like the EU negotiation team that I lead and am a part of really pushed for that last formulation that really puts the focus on the most vulnerable. And it was until like the last hours of discussion where we pushed and pushed and pushed, and we got that was the last change that was made in the text, that we got away with that comma and making it for the particularly vulnerable. And there I really felt like we had an impact. Yeah.
And then the day after, when you've been up until 4 a.m., do you get a sleep in, or do you need to?
I get a sleep in when the conference is over. Not the day after you go up and you continue the negotiation, but then afterwards I usually take some time off.
Nice. So that's about now.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Do you have what's your go-to when you've been up for a long time during the night and you need to go to the delegation meeting the next morning? Is it like splash of water in the face? Is it no coffee? What's the secret?
Yeah, good question. This time I tried something new. I tried to do some yoga every morning to wake up, and it worked quite well. Yeah. But otherwise, I think a lot of coffee.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I can also imagine that, like, with this, as you were saying, this coalition of like-minded developing countries, that they were really trying to, piggyback on the fact that they were still on that list, right? And sort of eat the cake and keep it. I want to open up a little bit if there's any questions from the listeners. Otherwise, I'll continue. Okay. Just jump in if there's any questions. Because I'm also wondering, we've been talking about policy that is impactful, right? But there's also an aspect of impacting policy yourself and sort of impacting climate action ambitions. Sort of, what would be your sort of best advice if you're a person who feel like, sure, I can adjust my own sort of habits, but I want politics to sort of raise the ambitions. I want governments to raise their ambitions. Like, what kind of bucket? Where would you put your bet? Like, is it to sort of push media, go into media yourself, or is it to like join, get training yourself in some kind of, some kind of education to, like, in your headspace, what is it that you feel like, this is a way to impact as a person?
I think there's many ways, and I think the trick is to do as many as you have the energy to do.
Yeah.
Because I think there is a lot with like how you yourself live and what decisions you make yourself. It's not going to change the world, what you do, but the world can't change if not people also change. So I think it's both in terms of making, like, feeling good about how you yourself live your life, but also to show to businesses and to politics that the people is ready for a change. Because I think a lot of governments don't dare to do the changes that are needed because they don't think the public will accept it.
Yeah.
But if the public kind of shows that they are ready for that change, I think that can increase the courage of governments to implement more ambitious policies. So I think that's one way. But then the other one is to make a change where you are, like in your job. What is it that your company or your business can change to be more climate friendly? What is it that you can do in your neighborhood, your house? But also, how do you vote? And are you active in a political party? Can you become active in a political party and be a driving force in that party for climate? So I think there is many different ways to do a change, and I think you kind of pick the ones that you feel comes easiest to you. But also, I think it's important to do things you think are fun, because if you're going to do it for a long time, it's I think that's the best way.
It needs to be sustainable over the long term. Yeah. So what's something that you feel like, in your work and in this kind of climate space globally, like, is there something that you feel like, I wish people would know this or care about this, or just like, is there something that you would feel like, it would have an impact if this was kind of, if this existed, or if this was people's mindset, or if people pushed more for this, like, what could that be?
No, sometimes if every person sat down and read the latest IPCC report, I think that, and really understood, you don't have to read the full thing, but just a kind of summary. I think if people really understood how serious climate change is and that it's here now, and because I think it's really easy to get distracted and kind of like, yes, it's important, but I really want this new beautiful dress for midsummer, or I really it's also really important that my business earns a lot of money, or like, you get distracted by other things as well, which are of course also important. But I think if you really understand how serious climate change is, then I think people would more try to steer their businesses and their lives to be a part of a positive change.
Yeah, I hear you, and I remember myself when I was reading. There was an article, I think it was probably in the New York Times, and it was about the fact that like, once we reach, it's not like the world is going to stop warming once we reach 1.5. It's just going to spiral. And this was like in 2016, like a week before Trump was going to be elected, and like my head was not in a good place in November 2016, because that just occurred to me that, like, okay, we're going on like a spinning ride here. That hadn't occurred to me. Is there something that you feel like is a common misconception, maybe not necessarily about climate change, but about the COP process, or sort of how, I would like to say, like, how the world works? Because I can feel sometimes that people are like, but the UN should fix this. And like, having worked a bit myself within the UN, it's like, well, unfortunately, it doesn't really work like that. One thing that I feel that is a misconception is that the UN would have a lot of power. or then I would maybe financial power, like that kind of, that it would have those teeth, but it doesn't. Like, is there something that you feel is a misconception about how the world works?
Yeah, I think you point to it quite a lot, because the UN is what we can agree to in the UN is often kind of the lowest common ambition.
Yeah.
So it is really the countries that are against driving ambition that can slow down the process. And in the UNFCCC world, we take all decisions with consensus. So if there's one country that doesn't want mitigation on the agenda, you don't get mitigation on the agenda unless you're able to convince that country. So I think, in a sense, what's happening on a national level, what is it that the people in that country can do, and what can we do to help that country come to the conclusion that mitigation is actually necessary and something we need to talk about, is so much more important, in a sense, than the UN negotiations, because we always continue to say in the process that it's a party-driven process, that's driven by the parties to the agreement. And it's always them who set the agenda. There's no one from the UN that really comes in and dictates what we're going to do. So I think, perhaps that's a misconception. I also think that sometimes you have this vision of it's kind of the developed world against the developing world in these negotiations. People tend to talk quite a lot in those two groups that barely exist. A group of developed and developing country. It's not really the way the world looks today. And I think that's also really clear in who actually decides in the process. And it's really a very few countries that block the entire process, and most countries in the world are actually wanting to do something about this and wanting to move forward. And I think that's sometimes that message doesn't come across, and I think it's actually quite hopeful that the majority of the world wants to do something about this.
That is way more hopeful than the other way around, which can also sometimes seem to be the case. I was thinking about something. I kind of lost it, but now that you've had this sort of half a year of being in the EU presidency, so Sweden has been the EU president. Do you feel like you come back to now working for Sweden only, and take something with you? What would that be?
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating how the EU works. That every half year we hand over the presidency of the EU to one of the member states, and then you take over the whole responsibility about coordinating all the EU work. And it doesn't feel like the most efficient process there is, but it's really it's been super interesting to see how much power is then handed over to one member state at a time to drive the whole process forward. I think it's been very intense, and a lot of kind of small administrative things that you don't think about booking meeting rooms, organizing conferences, scheduling bilaterals, and doing those kind of things, which I'm quite happy to hand over to the Spanish colleagues. But at the same time, you also get to see the entire process from another perspective, and you get to follow in kind of all the high-level discussions. You also see how it ties together with the EU internal discussions about what we do on climate in the EU. Also discuss more closely and work with the European Commission and what their role in this you get to see much more clearly as the presidency. So I'm not sure what I take with me. Maybe a better understanding of how the EU works, and happiness that we don't have to do this more than 4 or 6 months.
Yeah. Did you feel like Sweden was ready for this? Like, was it, or do you look back and you're like, whoa, we should have hired more people? You know what I mean? Like,
No, I think we prepared quite well, and for a long time. We started over a year ago, planning. We had this kind of list of things to do day by day almost. But we also had the elections just before. I think it's not ideal to have a new government having to deal with this as their first task. But I know that's often the case for many EU member states, because the schedule doesn't really follow national election problems. So I think Spain is going to be in the same situation this fall as well. So I think we were quite well prepared.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. All right, and is this something that's gonna, will this kind of echo at COP28? Will you feel like will it matter that Sweden was the EU president when you get to COP, or do you feel like that's going to be old news?
No, I'm sure it will. I think we really prepared the EU well for the meeting we had now, but also prepared all the positions that we had prepared, all the work and thinking we've done is ultimately for COP28. So I think a lot of our thinking and a lot of our preparations is going into making the EU being well prepared for COP28. So I do think it's going to make a difference. And of course now kind of all the colleagues from across the world would know the Swedish team quite well because they've seen us being a part of all different meetings. So in that sense, I also think we will continue to have very interesting discussions. And we also worked very closely with the Spanish colleagues that are now taking it on.
Yeah. And speaking of COP, I mean, as you were saying, like Bonn is more of a technical session, and then COP is more for the sort of politics. But if you, at least I've sort of seen this conversation or idea from like Johan Rockström et al. That like, COP should be more of just showing progress. It shouldn't be. There shouldn't be negotiations at COP, but there should be a climate meeting happening that we call COP. But it's more about showing progress and sharing solutions and ideas. What are your thoughts on this?
I think currently the COPs are both. I think they are, I think they're expecting, if it's 80,000 people or something in Dubai for the COP. And I think it was 40 or 60,000 now in Sharm el-Sheikh. So it is really this place where a lot of people from the whole world comes, a lot of ministers. And they do discuss, kind of showcase progress. They discuss how flourishing it is for your business to do more on climate. They discuss how different cities have been working, how they kind of brag about new climate policies in their own countries. And I think that's really useful. That's a really good way for kind of encouraging progress. But then at the same time, it's a small proportion of all of those people that go that are the actual negotiators and sit and negotiate. And I do think I don't think you can choose either or. Perhaps you don't necessarily have to have them together. But I also think this negotiation and the constant kind of commitment and engagement and dedication from all countries in the world on this topic really shows that we're dealing with it together and that all care about it. In a sense, I'm almost happy when, countries that you think don't care about climate change come in quite strongly in the negotiations and really care about their comma. Because that shows that they actually think this process has an influence over what they do in their country. And I think that's kind of common commitment to negotiate is also something.
Yeah. And is there some country that you feel like, whoa, I would never have expected this country to be so vocal on this issue?
No, but I mean, Saudi, they are very active sometimes. And I think that also shows that they care about what the discussion is.
Yeah.
There is many countries that you don't necessarily think are the like climate champions of the world, but on some topics they are all of a sudden super engaged and vocal and really drive ambition forward. Yeah,
that's true. Ironically, like the willingness to stop the process actually legitimizes how important it is. Like if you're going to put so much resources into stopping it, it's because it matters. I see that we're at 12, so we're supposed to wrap up. If there's any question, it can come this way now. No. Okay, good. Yes, there is a question.
Right.
Yes.
So you just mentioned about like countries that you didn't expect would care about climate change, like Saudi Arabia, but then wouldn't be also like it's just for like greenwashing, just for boosting the image instead of really caring about climate change.
Yeah, I don't know if they are trying to boost their image by by blocking mitigation from being on the agenda. I think it's more kind of a show that they really think this process has an impact on what's happening in their country. But I do think there's of course some countries that are talk very nicely about what they do on climate, what they care about climate, and then don't necessarily live up to it in their own country. But I also think in general, many countries put a lot of attention on the international process and hopes to the international process and might be more ambitious there than they are at home. Because if all other countries move alongside, they will dare to do more in their own country. So it's not necessarily that it's greenwashing or trying to make your reputation better just because you are more ambitious in the international arena than at home. It might be a way to enable more ambition at home as well, to make sure that the entire world moves together.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think also sometimes it's so. It's like an oxymoron. It's like a cognitive dissonance where it's like, wait, but you were just at another stage a week ago in that like private sector forum, like Saudi Arabia for sure, and can go all in on kind of saying things that would benefit, basically greenwashing, but also kind of like, we're using our oil money to and investing that in sort of reskilling and so on and so. So it's like, it's hard. Like sometimes you don't know if it's lip service and like what's the kind of ambition here really. It's hard to dig under the skin of like those giants who are just so powerful that even as a country you can do very little about their power. So again, we've reached 12 o'clock. Is there anything else that you thought about, Kajsa, that you're like, I should have said this, or before I go, I want to mention this?
No, I don't think so. It's been fun talking to all of you, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming. Thanks for everyone for coming, and thank you, Kajsa.
Great. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Impact Hub, our Impact Day, our monthly sessions that we host here. My name is Gabriela Rodriguez. I'm the director here at Impact Hub Stockholm. And for those of you who don't know what our work is, Impact Hub, we are a global network. We support social enterprises, social entrepreneurs, innovators, anyone that is working with impact-related things. It can be social, environmental, economic. And our network is based off maybe 24,000 entrepreneurial communities all over the world. And all of us are operated independently, and we are the office here in Sweden. And I'm so happy to be here with you all and to be present to our audience that is going to be online later on. Because part of our work that we do and what we want to do more of is to build communities, impact communities and networks, and connect those that are making different amazing things around the world and trying to live a better place. And this can be from any different sector. It can be from the public, private, academia, or from the non-for-profit sector. And one thing that we want to do here with Impact Day, with this open house that we host every month, is that can we spark different lights and different conversations and also ideas. So one big thing that for this occasion that we're very proud of is that our collaboration with the TEDx Stockholm community. And I would like to invite Andrew Henningen. He's he has been our Impact Hub member for many years. So we are now entering in this, how can we combine our expertise and our communities to multiply and to have a bigger outreach. So I'm going to invite Andrew just to make a quick introduction about our partnership.
Okay, thank you very much, Gabriella. I'm representing today TEDx Stockholm rather than just being a member of the Impact Hub community. And first of all, we're obviously very, very excited to be part of this new partnership with Impact Hub. Both for the practical side, we use this venue for our rehearsals, for coaching people and for meetings, but also because of the possibility to exchange ideas with the broader community of the Impact Hub members and all the other people who come here. But whenever I mention that I come from TEDx Stockholm, people always have 3 questions. So I'm going to answer those quickly just so that you know who we are. First question is always, what's the difference between TED, TEDx, and all the other TEDs? And it's very simple. TED is the brand used by the TED Foundation for globally organized events like TED 2023, TED Women, and so on. It's not many events, they're usually big events, and they're organized directly by TED. Then there are literally thousands of TEDx's. Those are independently organized events like TEDx Stockholm, TEDx Paris, TEDx Sydney, TEDx Tierra del Fuego. Wherever you go, there is a group. And these things are organized independently by small groups who apply for a license. They're not connected together. So my team organizes TEDx Stockholm, but not any of the others, though we actually have strong connections with all the other groups. And I know people in TEDx's all around the world because we have something in common. When people have understood that, TED is the big global events, TEDx is the local franchises, the next question is always, how much do I get paid? Now, this is actually interesting because one of the principles of the TEDx organization is that nobody gets paid. Speakers don't get paid, moderators don't get paid, organizers like me don't get paid, and the volunteers who help don't get paid. It's entirely pro bono, which means that I do a lot of work and then I get nothing for it except satisfaction, which is actually a lot. So then people, of course, come to the third question and they're thinking, if you have to work a lot and get paid nothing, then how do I get involved? Because everybody wants to be part of this. And there's two basic ways to get involved. One is to become a volunteer, become part of the team. And there's actually an application form on the website where you can say, I want to be part of this, I want to be a volunteer. Or you can just come up to any of us. We're often here in Impact Hub. We're easy to find. You just ask us for more information and we can explain how you can become a member of the team. And of course, you can also get involved by being a speaker. And we are always looking for potential speakers. But as a catch, we're not looking for wonderful speakers. We're looking for people with interesting ideas worth spreading. If they can speak already, that's okay. It doesn't hurt. But if they can't speak, it's not a problem because we have a lot of expert coaches who can take anybody and bring them to TED level in the time necessary to organize an event. So if you'd like to get involved, get in touch with us. We're happy to talk to you. And we're always here because this is our home. This is where TEDx Stockholm lives now. We have all our meetings here. We have our rehearsals here. We have the coaching here. And as a TEDx, as an Impact Hub member, I'm also here all the time anyway. So I'm easy to find. So thank you, Gabriella.
Thank you. Thank you. Oop. Thank you, Andrew. And yes, I mean, it's such a wonderful experience to have TEDx Stockholm community with us, and because we also have the opportunity to connect with other people that are just around the world spreading amazing things. And one of these group of people are you guys that are here today with us. And I'll keep it short on my side because I really want everyone to get to know the work that you're doing, your areas of expertise, your points of view, because at the end of the day, we need everyone's perspective in order to create like more, to have a holistic approach to changes that we want to build in our cities, in our communities. And as mentioned today, the topic is everything around climate action, public policy, entrepreneurship, innovation for sustainable development. So let's go into it. I'll introduce you real quick. I'll say your names, the four of you, but I'm going to give the space for you a couple of minutes to introduce about your work as well. So first we have Maya Bosnick. She's an expert. She's an economist and has all things gender budgeting and financing. So she's going to bring us her gender perspective of everything that she does. And then we have Lova Unge. She's an experienced lawyer, and she specializes in anti-corruption and human rights. A vast experience on how we are able to incorporate these lenses on more just communities. And then we have Anna Konig-Gelmir. She's former Stockholm's mayor, and now she advocates all things around like public policy, but also how we leaders of the world are able to create more sustainable cities as well. And then we have Monia. Monia, she's an academic and ex-diplomat as well, but she has a PhD in all things sustainability and a professor, so a bit of the public perspective, but also academic. So how do we bridge those bridge, or how do we bridge that gap? But let's go one by one. So you can introduce a bit about yourself and then just mention why you're here as well. Right.
Well, thank you very much for inviting. This is why we are here, at least I am. It's really, really good to be here. It's good to see you and not see you, but know that there are other people who are watching us. As you introduced, I am an economist, but I work with public finance and budgets. I spent all my career working with public finance and budgets, but you rightfully said another thing that is very important to me professionally and personally, and that is gender and how to include, I'm seeing some familiar faces, how to include gender and green perspective in our budget and policy making. So I will be really happy to share, but not before the colleagues introduce themselves.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm also really glad to be here. I'm a lawyer, as you said. I've all along focused on human rights and actually business and human rights. Already before the concept was born, I focused on business and human rights. And then back then, there was not so many companies working with human rights, other than, of course, labor rights, which are based on human rights. And when you talked about sustainability, it was mainly focused around environment and climate, above all. So I went to Peru to work there for 2 years at human rights NGOs and also for the United Nations. But then I spent a lot of time at law firms working with corporate law and mainly labor law. But now this has changed. Sustainability is now much broader, also including social aspects like human rights, gender equality, and so on. And right now I'm working for a large, for Scania, as an expert within human rights and anti-corruption. And we of course need also the companies with us on the sustainability journey.
Welcome.
Thank you for letting me be here. I'm super excited. Impact, climate, gender, innovation, this really topics close to my heart. And out of my perspective, I think I have the most honorable job you can have as a politician, being a mayor of a capital. Because for me, city leaders are very close to the citizens, and that's also why I engage very early in the C40 and international networks of cities. Very close to the people, but also very agile and not only creating visions, but actually also being very operative in reaching the visions. And sometimes I'm very critical to the nation states because they still subsidize too much fossil fuel and fossil energy solutions on a national scale. And of course, that is not reaching the Paris Agreement. It's actually the cities who present climate action plans that are in line with the Paris Agreements. It's not so many nation states. So for me, it's very important to talk about what real true impact can be. When it comes to sustainable solutions. And I'm so tired and frustrated right now because I think it's a lot of sub-debates about arguing about the taxation on plastic bags, or if you talk about will offshore wind power ruin my horizon? Because we don't have time with this. We have to focus on the issues and the areas that really do greatest impact. And I think that we all know what that is. It is energy, it's sustainable, renewable energy solutions and storage, but it's also housing when it comes to construction material. Circular economy is really important with ambition to have zero waste. And of course, mobility to be free from fossil fuels, but also shared mobility solutions in cities. So we have these areas that created the most impact that we need to focus on. And of course, I'm a politician, so I would just hold the mic a little bit, but then I will let the panel go. But for me, it's like I know the industry is really transforming, and that's great. But that doesn't mean like the politician can walk away from responsibility. So I think it's super important also to highlight that really important tool we have with public procurement. I mean, cities, nations, regions procure for billions of dollars every year. So we can use this purchasing power. For example, now a lot of companies, individuals actually ban products from companies that are still active in Russia. we can do and leverage the same kind of force when it comes to what we procure and what we support to make it sustainable with low emissions, but also circular. So in the city during my leadership, we had ambition to be, only procure electric cars and vehicles and transport after 2030. And of course, that was before the EU legislation. But Amsterdam, for example, they already have it, 2025, to be emission-free from mobility solutions on land and on water. And that makes all the investments are heading there now. So it's also a lot of possibilities for these cities to have brave leaders who stand up and say, okay, we're going in this direction, are you with us? And I think we can do more in Sweden, but also more in other countries. For example, in Sweden, the public procurements often focus on the lowest price and not like asking and nudging for circular material, and that is not sustainable. So we also have to see what other countries do in this area, because it's a lot of potential that can go in our way. And I think that the UN Secretary General said this is a decade of action. And we're really, because we're all going to be responsible both for actions but also inaction. Yeah. If we don't take responsibility, we still continue to increase the emissions. So that's why I think we need to look at the areas and the policy that makes greatest impact. We have the solutions. It's not like the rate of innovation. It's not that the science isn't there. It's the rate of implementation. So that's what I'm asking for. I can talk for longer time, but then I will turn the mic to.
This is great. This is like a preview of what we're going to be speaking about in terms of how, because how you're saying science is there, the data is there and everything, but how do we collaborate to create this change and this implementation? So it's very important, all of you, for your different points of views and expertise that are here. But maybe you, Mona?
I'm glad that you spoke about collaboration, because that's where I kind of like have an interest. I just wanted to start with a few weeks ago, I was in a round table and there was this question of what keeps you awake every morning, or what wakes you up every morning? And my answer was my 5-year-old son. But the truth is sustainability. I think that this is something very important to me. My journey with sustainability started with my career as a diplomat 14 years ago. I moved from public office to the private sector and then to academia, and this kind of like gave me an opportunity to see sustainability from different perspectives, from the public sector, the private sector, and academia. Also, I had the opportunity to join one of the NGOs, which is TEDx Stockholm, recently a year ago, as a partnership manager. So I'm part of the team as Andrew. and as Andrew said, we're all volunteers in TEDx Stockholm. And this kind of like multiple or different views on sustainability from different perspectives allowed me to see that what is important here is collaboration, is the fact that everyone has to be on board. We have to leverage expertise and different experiences and different needs of different stakeholders. So I hope we can cover that in our discussions, and looking forward to that.
And this is perfect, good intro, because that brings me to my my first question in terms of having everyone's point of view in sit in the table, but also not only equally sit at the table, but have that equity of who are those that are left behind, who are those that are missing to have more presence, and who are the most at the front to be affected by all these like issues with climate change and natural disasters. So to my first question, I actually want to bring it to you, Maya, because it's all things gender perspective and considering vulnerable communities in our cities, in our countries. So with your experience and your expertise and the approach that you give with your everyday work, how can the different sectors influence to create and implement more environmental, sustainable policies? And how does the gender lens on it incorporate to create this, these
Thank
policies?
you very much for this easy question. I say
Perfect.
it's not an easy question because it does require a very long answer and very analytical approach. But I think together, when my colleagues were speaking now, I would always want to say yes, and then of course you would want to inject gender perspective there, because the first thing that I would always say, we can't really have climate justice without gender justice. And I mean, that really goes, many people before me said it, and I sometimes feel like a broken record, because as you said rightfully, Anna, we sometimes get a bit tired, because when you work especially with gender equality, you are sometimes making one step forward and then some steps back. But not everything is that pessimistic, I would say. So in my opinion, there are several aspects to really be very mindful of. First of all, we are now very much into environmental policies and making environmental policies, and again, climate justice, which is rightfully so. I don't think we have any other option. But I think it's really important not to have a competition between working on different issues, like, oh, now we are working on human rights and gender, and now we are working on environment, so I'm sorry, we can't really inject gender perspective now. And I think there is a bit of a danger in that, and danger in that in the public sector, where I mostly work with, but also private sector and our ESG policies. So the first thing that I would say, I think it's very important to acknowledge that climate change, both mitigation and adaptation, has very, very profoundly different impact on women and men.
Yeah.
Namely, when we talk about even the impact of any natural disaster, it's always profoundly increasing gender gaps, and we see that women are mostly hit by the crisis. And sometimes we do not acknowledge that, and we do not acknowledge that because we don't look at that direction. We always have other priorities. So that would be my first thing to say, is that yes, it's important to have environmental policies, but it's also important to acknowledge that they cannot work right without understanding gender impact. That's the first thing. And then the second thing, and maybe that is my key message for today, is that we should not only have separate environmentally friendly gender responsive policies, but all the policies and budgets needs to be analyzed for the impact on environment and gender. And last point to say, my colleagues often ask me, and my colleagues are the finance officers, mostly working in governments around the world. And I didn't mention that when I introduced myself, but I work mostly in developing countries. And they usually ask me, yes, but now you are introducing this green budgeting and gender budgeting. I mean, that's not really our focus, you know. We are focusing on economic effectiveness, efficiency, value for money. That's what we as finance officers were born and raised to say. You know, that's our job. We need to be economically efficient. But without really taking care of the planet and the people, I mean, there is no point in having beautiful finance and beautiful policies and beautiful politics, if you wish. So that would be my my main perspective, is that we actually really need to, that's not a popular term anymore, but we need to mainstream. We can't just think that we have solved the problem by having a really beautiful ESG strategy or really beautiful environmental policy. We need to be a little bit more mindful of all the other policies and make them a little more responsive. Yes, you can see it's not an easy answer.
But to your point of what you mentioned at the beginning of it's a good and a bad thing to have gender aspect, but in the term of it shouldn't be like something radical or anything. It should be mainstream. It should be something, oh, you're creating budget? Oh, yes, this is what we are. It's part of the everyday questions or things to consider.
Can I just come in for 1 second? Yes. Sorry, you inspired me, because Anna was talking about public procurement. And you know, public procurement is so gender blind. Who are we procuring from? Who are the owners of the companies that we are giving these billions to? Whose jobs are we creating? All sort of these questions, you know, this is what strikes me the most in this work. We've never asked them. We just do the analysis, and then we are really surprised. Yeah. Oh my God, how didn't we see that none of the public funds, all of these billions, they are not really going in the hands of women who are working in these sectors. So yes, environmentally responsive procurement and gender responsive together.
I'm going to ask you the same question, Lova, because here it's a very interesting point of view of how to create sustainable policies and environmental sustainable policies on places that are fragile democracies or fragile everything, fragile institutions, organizations. So in this aspect, in terms of corrupted areas, and what's your view on it in terms of what do you see most of, or what are the questions that you get asked, or what do you advocate for?
First of all, I want to add on to what Maya just said, and advocate for a holistic approach in general. So as I view sustainability, there are four main parts. So human rights, labor rights, environment, climate, and then anti-corruption. And then all these are interconnected. And I think that's really important. I think you said it a bit as well. And you also mentioned holistic approach because when we work on these topics, and I think it applies both in private sector and in public sector, we tend to end up in silos, as I think you said as well. We are working on environment or gender or anti-corruption, and at companies you have different departments doing all these things, and they are not necessarily talking to each other, and they might actually be working on the same thing, but from different angles. So I think that's and gender equality is of course one aspect, but then you have human rights is so broad. You have indigenous people's rights. You have freedom of speech and expression. It's so broad and it's so complex, and that's why we also need to address these topics from different angles at the same time. So I think that's maybe my main message, to work on these topics holistically. And then back to your question regarding fragile states, of course. I don't know if you saw my TEDx talk, but that was about corruption and how it negatively impacts sustainable development. So it negatively impacts gender equality and climate action. And if you look at the 2030 agenda, it will affect all aspects. We won't achieve a sustainable development as long as we don't tackle corruption. Yeah. And of course, if we are in fragile states, we need to be more careful, of course, and see if we want to invest in a country, where does this money end up and in whose pockets, and who does it benefit and who does it not benefit. But then we have also corruption issues in Sweden, not least within public procurement. So who are we purchasing from and why? Is it because we know that person? It could be a good thing, but if it's only if that is the only reason, it might not be good. So we need to really keep an eye on corruption as well. And actually, the most bribed authorities are the environmental authorities. So, and also another thing that's really important is a just transition. So when we talk a lot about transitioning from fossil energy to renewable energy, which is of course really important. We should really be doing that, but we need to do that in a just way, where we include everyone, we leave no one behind. And unfortunately, when you look at renewable energy, it is associated with forced labor and human rights abuses. So we need to also be careful. And that's also a risk when you end up in the silo thinking. You only look, it's a really good image out there if you Google that on climate, it's carbon tunnel vision. You see like a circle with like poverty, you have inequality, you have biodiversity, and there's a focus only on carbon emissions. And you sort of miss the full picture. And it's not going to be sustainable if you don't take all these other aspects into consideration as well.
Yes.
I can reflect on that topic too, because I think it's really crucial. And I think that organizations as World Economic Forum understand it needs to be a systematic approach. It needs to be holistic. And of course, many women around the world has suffered the most from the climate change. Of course, also lack resources of land use, but also not represented at the table. If you look at the energy companies, it's not so many women out there. So I think that we need to work on that, but both, of course, also to have this holistic approach where you can see that India is a great example, I think, that said, okay, we understand that the quick way of clean energy and electricity would be coal, because that's so many 200 millions are lacking electricity. But the most sustainable way is solar. So they have goals to 2030, and they're working in that direction, because so many women today around the world don't have access to clean electricity when they cook. So we know that also kills a lot of children and women as we speak. And another example is, of course, also you need to have data that can make them accountable, because my friend who's a mayor in Freetown in Sierra Leone, she's very frustrated because when her president go to Glasgow, he say all the things, nice things, the things that is expected. Then it goes back, gives a contract to one of his friend that leads to deforestation. So this is also, you need also to really measure with organizations, with lawyers and other things that really knows the data of how it actually is implemented, the words or the nice speeches. But one thing we use, I think the data is really valuable for us. If you look at the mobility solutions, you can have a clear gender lens there. You can see that many cities believe that, okay, we do investment here in public transport from A to B and they can commute to work. But actually, we know that women take much shorter trips, often with children, with buggies and so on. So they are actually having another movement pattern in cities. And that's why it's not so easy. And often women also suffers from unsafe environment in public transport. So it's many gender issues you have to also to reflect on when you do investments. And then you need the gender data also to create the best proactive decisions.
So I just wanted to circle back to the idea of what is the solution, what is the alternative, what is the way out? Because for example, we usually hear that, we need strong legislation, we need politicians to do their job, for example, which is an okay claim, but it calls also another claim, which is to go beyond what legislation wants, because legislation cannot cover everything. Legislation is limited, is not responsive timely to emergent challenges. We know that when it comes to sustainability, environmental and social challenges are evolving as we speak. Legislation has always this limitation of time. It takes time, of course, and I'm referring here. There's a couple of legislations at the EU level that I've been working on, the CSRD and the AI Act. With all the hype around artificial intelligence, there is an AI Act that's upcoming in a couple of years. These couple, just as an example, couple of legislations, they've been taking years and they will take more years to come into effect. But things are changing and evolving, and policy at the end will always cover certain things and not others. And when you come to at a multilateral level and you want to harmonize it, or on the national level, then you kind of like you will create loops in the national on the national level and create things that are not kind of like will not be covered anyway. So I think that on the one hand, legislation takes time. On the other hand, is also legislation cannot cover everything, and on the other on a third hand is legislation will always be will always kind of like be a compliance-centered approach. And we don't want that. From my perspective, having worked in private sector, companies, when you talk about sustainability or sustainable development, usually they end up saying, okay, what the law says. Let's comply to the law and full stop. That's a problem, because then you are in the logic of checking boxes and doing business as usual, and kind of like you have your legal team doing the. I'm sure you can relate to that. The legal team is on one, in its own silos, talking about silos, and the the day-to-day activities or operations are business as usual, has nothing to do with the legislation or has nothing to do with the right thing. So what we want is to go beyond legislation, is to go beyond the coercive. Of course, I'm not saying that legislation is not important. It's very important. It can lead to change. It has its own role to play. But I think as a society, we should expect, at least from the private sector, that they do the right thing. And I think today, a lot of companies also that realize that it's not only about compliance, it's also about doing the right thing, because there is a business case to it. And I don't like this word of business case to sustainability precisely. But unfortunately, in the corporate world, there has to be a business case to everything. So when it comes to sustainability, today, some companies realize that there is a business case for sustainability, because it can enhance their legitimacy. It can maintain their legitimacy towards their environment, towards their stakeholders and shareholders. It can also enhance their competitive edge, or create a competitive edge within their competition. With their competitors. It's also it's a good strategy for a long-term survival. And then, these are basic business notions. Every organization has a contract with the society, with the environment around it, and it has to fulfill that these expectations to survive and to thrive. And I think sustainability is a contract that every organization has to look at and fulfill, and this can only be done through or one of the ways is to have multi-stakeholder engagement and have different stakeholders, as we said about collaboration, and have different groups, different minorities, sectors, private NGOs, private sector, academia, research. We talked about data, so that we can leverage expertise and leverage experiences from different perspectives and approaches. So I think I hope I'm not far from the.
In your experience on that point, because we from a little takeaway from what each one of you were mentioning or highlighting is to have like this a holistic approach, not working in silos, trying to find ways to collaborate, and because everything is going to have an impact in another way. So, for example, if we are driving this new clean energy solution, who is being affected at the other end, or so who should be making those innovation decisions, like in terms of are there the legal departments, are there when it comes to policy making, should it come from the politicians, like the government side, or should the private sector push this, or just like how? Maybe you would like.
I'm talking in my pen.
Can I speak?
Again, I think this is, all what we are saying here, it really, it makes sense, and it sounds simple. And it's not simple, of course, because exactly, because when we are talking about silos, it's very easy to stay in a silo. It's very easy. It's the business as usual, and even if you change it slightly, and you feel good. And I think what we are seeing now, as you just said, Monia, we are seeing that it's popular to be good, which is already better than before. It wasn't popular to be good. So nobody cared, really. It was a business as usual, and it was all about GDP. When we talk about public finance, it was all about economic development. Where I was growing up and studying, we only talk about economic development because we were thinking if there is economic development, we will all be happy. We will all prosper, and we didn't. And the same thing with companies. If only we make good profit, we will all be happy. It will be really good, and it wasn't. The planet wasn't happy, the people in the company were not happy, and even those who got the profit were quite broken. So I think what we are witnessing, and all of us, I think, here and there and sitting here, we are in the middle of the change, and that change is coming, and it's here, and I wouldn't say it's radical enough, but that's maybe my perspective. But we are seeing companies, as you said, Monia, we are first, I think legislation is very important because I do agree with you, however, it's not the end at all. But I was working in countries around the world, and it was just so hard to get that legislation there. Because there was always excuse, we would do it if it was prescribed, but it wasn't prescribed. So I think environmental assessment and gender assessment together, that has to be part of the business as usual. We should not be surprised. I'm constantly talking to surprised people because they see what is the result. But the last point to say who should drive it, I think everybody has a role to play. And all of us sitting here from our own perspective, I mean, we could all work together. I mean, we all have a role to play in our own function. So I think, but I do think that what we are witnessing now, and it's part of your question, is that we are actually seeing more public-private dialogue and learning. I'm often invited now by startups and companies to talk about my experience. And when I was first time invited, I was really surprised because I was like, I don't know anything about startups. I was not in a private sector. I work with governments. But there is the need to take that learning from developing countries who, by the way, often do amazing job. And by the way, they least contribute to the climate change and they suffer the most, which is also very important to acknowledge. So there are a lot of lessons. It's not just coming one way. We can learn a lot from each other and from each other and from each other here. So to long answer to the question, I think we all have a very important role to play. And it's not just one sector initiating the change. It has to, and it's already happening. So,
On the note of everybody can have a role, or who has the mandate. A few years ago, I conducted this study with some major companies in Sweden. And interviewed their sustainability managers or sustainability-oriented or dedicated managers or head of sustainability anyway, different titles. But people who work with sustainability in these big multinationals and corporations. And my question was, who has the mandate? Who will create this change? Who are the change makers in these organizations? Is it you as a sustainability manager? Is it the CEO? Is it someone in the middle management? Is it? And one answer was, it's not about the title. It's about mandate, and that mandate is not given, is someone who has it within them. And he told me that this is one of the major Swedish companies I'm talking about. I cannot, of course, say the name of it, and he told me that we have, because every time we have a meeting, we have Helena, who has nothing to do with sustainability, but because she is driven by, she's a person who is driven by sustainability, and she's always brings up the question of sustainability. So it's not our CEO, it's not me, it's people who are, it's anyone can have this kind of like be a change maker and play a role. Just so that I wanted to.
Yeah, I can address on that as well, because I think that is a great example, but it's also a challenging example. I was invited for a lunch here in the city, and there was a lot of sustainability directors in the room, big companies. It was 100% women. And some of them also shared HR and sustainability that used to be. And they said, the problem for us is that we do these plans and we report, but the financial, they are guys and they have different KPIs. So when we come and say, let's do this sustainability investment, they are like, too expensive, too many years to write it off. And so I think that is just one gender perspective that is some challenge. So you need to make this, and everyone say it, but it's difficult to make it the core of the business, to make it like this is something for the board of the company. This is something in the DNA of the company. Otherwise, you will not attract talent. And if it's something that companies and cities will compete about, it's talents for the future. So that's one thing. But I also think that we have arranged seminars in Stockholm that it's a lack between what's out in the market, entrepreneurs, business, ideas, researchers, WWF, other organizations have great solutions. But the one on the purchasing side doesn't know about it. So they're still going on what they already know, and then they consume or procure the high emissions products or services. So I think that is something that we really need to work on, like to do more innovative procurement, but also have test bed, working with academia, working with business, working with entrepreneurs. So we can create this kind of, we don't really know, but we try and we measure it and we test and we scale what's functioning. And I think that is a mindset, but it needs to be brave leaders. And we not always have that. So how can we encourage the leaders to also to be fail sometimes?
Celebrate failures. I think Lova is going to, yes, celebrate.
First, I wanted to say one thing about legislation, and I agree totally that legislation is not the full answer. But I can see the development within business and human rights, because I've been focusing on human rights since 2007 and followed this topic. And it's just now the recent years that companies are really focusing on this, and it's because we have legislation. We have the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act. We have the UK Modern Slavery Act. We have the French Corporate Vigilance Act, and now we have on its way the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. I mean, we have the Norwegian Transparency Act, and it's just a tsunami right now. And I can see companies focusing so much more on this now. None of these legislations is perfect, and we need to go beyond compliance. But it's definitely a push, and I wouldn't have the role that I have if it wasn't for the legislation. And also within companies, what we're doing right now at the company where I work is that we're having a human rights steering committee where we try to not only preach for the choir, so not only human resources, sustainability, and but also purchasing, sales. You know, the real business, because of course you can see that. I don't know. You said you were at an event with only women. You tend to see that in sustainability, right? It's only women and not necessarily the ones taking the decisions. But we need to have everyone on board, even if they don't. Many people who don't know about human rights say it's not relevant, but they don't think it's relevant because they don't know about it. So when you increase the knowledge level and get people on board, then they do realize that it is relevant. And the same goes for, of course, gender equality, which I consider a part of human rights. And so I think it's really important. And that I come back to the holistic approach, right? It's good when you have this person who always raises a topic, but it should not depend on just one person. No. You should have it in your structure, and you should have everyone there, and the business, not only like the in-house functions. I don't know who's next now. Everybody wants to see something.
Maybe quick, and then we go back to you, Maya.
Yeah, just to revert back to the idea of is not one person, or because it's true. Usually, sustainability managers are women, because we have this idea of like it's non-financial, so women can do it, and it's more kind of like a feminine thing about care. We care, and
we care.
Yeah, we care. So we give
we
it to which is not. It's not a problem in itself as an idea, but the problem is when women have. To begin with, are kind of like in this defavorable position, and then you are given this challenge of pushing sustainability as a strategy, sustainability as part of the core of the business, and you are part of these middle managements, middle-aged men that are driven by bonus, by KPIs, by the annual revenue, and you are kind of like advocating for, okay, let's be sustainable because it's the right thing to do. And then you have the legal department says, well, we have the CSRD, we will take care of that, don't worry about that. Yeah. So, and then, the financial guys, is there a business case for this, what you say in this strategy? And you have to kind of like prove that, okay, we're going to make money because we're going to be sustainable, which is to begin with is a wrong way of approaching sustainability. So today, unfortunately, in most of the companies, even though those that try to kind of like voice or give this image of being sustainable are usually, I don't like the greenwashing expression, but it's more kind of like they take it as a communication strategy, as a marketing strategy. Yeah. We are going to be sustainable because it looks good, as you said, Maya, because now the hype is to do the right thing and be the good guy. But when it comes to day-to-day operations, we're going to keep business as usual. We'll do sustainability on the periphery. We'll do some small initiatives that has no impact on our operations, and we'll just, we have to kind of like focus on growth. And then on the other hand, you have one person who is usually a woman, but sustainability manager, or Helena, who is in the HR or whatever, trying to advocate in meetings.
Or Helena.
So it kind of like it becomes kind of like for them, sustainability becomes a means in best case scenario, not a goal.
Not a value, right?
Not
or
a
not like a
value,
company value, but rather a checkbox of
worse than that is
PR.
the instrument. PR. The instrumentalize it, as you said exactly, Gabriela. The instrumentalize sustainability. It becomes a means. It becomes kind of like a tool to reach growth and reach good transparency or whatever. All these buzzwords, but nothing changes in the core. Because probably leadership does not believe that sustainability is a good idea, because we are not in the business of making the world sustainable. We're in the business of making business. The business is in the business of making business. So we're not here. We're not NGOs. Will not be.
And on that point, I think there's still like that kind of misconception that if you are interested in having this holistic approach of taking care not only on your financial sustainability, but also on your environment sustainability, your social sustainability, your employers and employees, there's this misconception that it's for a long time that it's like your good. How do you say, like, your good way of being a nice person? But no, it makes financial sense as well to be to incorporate sustainability
exactly. On a long term, not because usually the financial guys or the middle management usually they see the end of the year because they want their bonuses.
Yes, exactly.
And so they see how it's going to be beneficial for us. If it's not beneficial, let it go. We'll do the compliance and we'll forget about it.
Yes.
Which is a wrong idea. We have to look at sustainability as a long-term strategy, and I think that private sector has a great role to play here, which joins again the idea of collaboration and different stakeholders, engagement and advocacy. I'll leave
it to Maya first, and then to Anna. I think. There. Yes. Oh, you wanted to? Or no? I know. I thought you wanted to.
I can.
No, but, I surely can. No, I thought you were. But you were going to say. Okay. Yeah.
Could I say something first? Because I was. I wanted to make the conversation a little bit more to the optimistic side, even though I have the full paper of data that are very pessimistic. I even shared them when we were talking before this conversation, and everybody was like, so I won't share them now. But I want to share that I think I started saying that in many countries around the world, there are excellent practices from which we can learn. And now I'm looking at my two friends from Ukraine. And I wanted to share example of the work that Ukraine is still doing. Now, we all know that Ukraine is now in war. So there can't be bigger crisis than that crisis. And in such circumstances, Ukrainian Ministry of Finance is sending to all the line ministries and all the oblasts, which are region in Ukraine, they're asking them when they ask for the funds, because, government is functioning, it has to. They're asking them for gender implications of these requirements. Now, this practice that is called gender budgeting is a very advanced practice. It's advanced for Sweden, it's advanced for Germany, it's advanced for the whole world because it's unfortunately advanced, because I think it should be a common practice, right? Because we are asking for the implication of funds on different group of citizens. That's as basic as that, like who is really receiving the funds. So with that example, I want to say that, not to say if Ukraine can do it now, everyone can, but I also do want to first say that this is such a great practice and that, as you said, we always use economic arguments. We are just told that these are the best arguments. It will pay off. Like you do the hard work, but it will pay off. You will have a financial reward. But it is true that if you do environmentally friendly budget and policy making and gender responsive budget and policy making, which is basically all the public services that you are providing, and at the same time, all the products, if you develop your AI that is not inheriting gender biases, which all this fantastic AI system that we are now using passionately, I did when I was looking at your questions. Beautiful. But the point is that these systems are also reflecting inequalities in a society. We know that. You know, the face recognition, what kind of faces you are recognizing, what kind of loans you are, who is getting their loans application approved. So my point is that, yes, there is economic arguments. I talk to these, as you say, financial guys, even though financial people, I'd say. And yes, they do ask me, I prefer human rights arguments. I prefer that we do it because it's really important to do. And that's what we are paid to do, to serve the people with the public budgets. But my economic arguments usually work better. And there is, of course, economic rationale. And I'm finishing here. I'm looking at the clock. I know that my colleagues are...
I'm going to do.
The hands
But maybe we give it to Anna, and then I'll close with one general question to everyone.
A little bit optimistic as well. But yeah, because of course, I mean, to defend the business and the financial department, some say, you know, I have an activist as a director of sustainability. They don't understand the business model at all. And I think that this language need to be translated, because it is possibilities. And there's a lot of business leaders that understand that is both good for business and climate. But what I would say is that I have changed my mind when it comes to regulation. I actually think it's a really good idea if you look at the EU and Fit for 555 and to set clear targets and everyone on board. And I don't think we should have seen this kind of transformation so fast if it wasn't for this kind of regulation. So I like that. It's long term. It doesn't change from year to year. I think that is also very important if you do it. And I also think that sometimes, you know, liberals say it's bad for small businesses if you have too much regulation. But actually in this, we see all the entrepreneurs, the scale-ups, the startups, they're much faster than the big traditional companies. So this actually, they are just running. So what you can see, it's really tough for the big traditional companies compared to this. So it's like acceleration agents. So I think actually now this argument doesn't hold. So what we need is really clear targets and regulation, and then measure. And those who are not living up to the standards, they out. And the consumers. If you are a city individual, just support, you know, the best option out there.
Yes. Oh, I have maybe
just on the idea of legislation, because it's a very important, and I don't know if it was clear when I said legislation is very important, leading and guiding, and kind of like being in the front seats, but then there is a whole, you know, backstage work that has to be done. And I think that when it comes to all these sensitive areas of sustainability and stuff, you have to have a legislation that is, of course, coercive, strong, out there to lead, to guide. But also you have to have people realize that they have to go beyond that compliance and go beyond those legislations. The legislation is there kind of like to guide you and to kind of like is the bottom line, let's say, is the bottom line. That's kind of like homogenize the way the society and all organizations kind of like act in the same direction. But every actor has to do their part, and every actor has its own perspective, its own experience, its own sensitivities and own differences, and has to be aware of that. So legislation can be sometimes seen as hindering the business sector. Yes, I agree, but that's not true. In the same study I've done with the sustainability managers, I asked about these legislation, the soft and coercive ones, kind of like standards and stuff, and they told me, well, I leverage whatever challenge comes my way, and I think all these, some see it as a burden. All these legislation, as you said, Love, is kind of like a huge tsunami of all these acronyms coming at the EU level when it comes to sustainability, and the kind of like all companies are kind of like scared, literally scared, and all of them, they're like, what is this? How can we? Because legislation also can mean that you pay kind of like a fee if you don't comply. Like the AI Act comes with 6% of the annual revenue if you don't comply with the by 2026, and so they have this huge fear from it, but there was one of my interviewees that said, well, I leverage this burden and I see it as something that I can learn from. I use it as a strategy for myself to how to make my strategy better, how to make my goals and targets align for the next year with what is expected from us. So I think that it's a question of approach. It's a question
Yes.
of approach, how to approach things, how to see things, how to leverage things, how to see the good side of them instead of just saying, oh, legislation is too much, oh,
Yeah.
it's hindering our, and this is also on a national, on the nation states level, because some developing countries usually arguments against SDGs or sustainable development is that, oh, it hinders our economic,
Yes.
efforts towards the development, and it's not fair to us. The global north has, you took your part, you've done this, and now it's us to pay. But I think it's a wrong way to look at things. I think it's kind of like it's all about perspective, all about how to approach things. Sorry.
And on that note, yeah, because I want to be mindful of everyone's times, and I really want to hear your answers
So
on this last one. No worries. I'm getting so excited. I'm like, yes, no. But on a personal, but also on the work that we do, because we know that statistically, for example, social entrepreneurship, the majority, and as stated here, the majority of the people-driven impact companies and thinking of how to create like a better place and for your communities and everything are women. So social enterprises the majority are led by women. And this is in Sweden as well. And for example, numbers from like Almi in terms of funding, the majority are given to enterprises. And then from one tiny % is given to social enterprises. So that means that women are not funded as much.
I just wanted on the optimistic note, because we were talking about optimism. There is and going back to academia, because we didn't talk about academia and data. Data shows that women can be change makers when it comes to sustainability.
Exactly. Yep.
And part of my research is social enterprises.
Yes.
And I think that women are leaders when it comes to social enterprise. And
Yes.
it shows like kind of like this new business model where you can combine both sustainability and economic gains or financial gains. So I think on a positive note, I think women can lead.
Don't
the
answer
change.
yet, because that's my question.
That's your
Don't
question.
answer.
Okay, you go
Let me
ahead.
ask the question. So my question is because, for example, you are leaders in your fields, and you have this activist spirit in terms of I want to make a change because, and you're leading this way. From all your different sectors. So either you're not officially activists, you are, just by who you are, what you're doing, what you're talking about, what you are encouraging to, like, not knocking doors, throwing them down, throwing doors down. So I want to end it a little bit on a positive note, because a lot of these like struggles later on are, yes, they have like a positive spirit or like a hope or that things can change. So my question to you is, what is it, and this is going to be for everyone, so we can finish up with this part. What is it what do you see in your field? What gives you hope in your field? What keeps you driving to continue, and what changes can you see? You can tell your colleagues, what changes do you think, or what words of encouragement from those colleagues, the majority women that are in the sustainability departments, like leading this way? What's nudges or what kind of approaches they can give to continue this work and to make it sustainable but also systematic? What steps?
Easy question.
Yes, easy question. I have it.
Thank you so much. First, can I start with back to pessimism just for 1 second?
Yes.
When we are talking about, I talk a lot about money, as we can see, as a finance, and I would like to talk about private venture capital and just share that it's 5 to 15% of those who are angel investors, so who are investing and in impact-oriented or social entrepreneurs, only 5 to 15% are women. Only 5 to 15%. And do you know how much of that capital is given to a woman company, venture capital? Can you guess? 2%. So, I mean, come on. If we talk about, it's women, yes, of course, it's women and men. And I think it's just really important to have these numbers in head and just to realize, okay, well, we are not really investing in anything that women are having as an idea. And when we as women are investing, well, we could also maybe invest a little more. and I'm not now talking about, I'm just talking about this fact. But having said that, I think what gives me hope, and first of all, the example that I shared from Ukraine, I think it's fabulous. We were working on that. That was Swedish government-funded project, and we were together working with the government of Ukraine, and they really did a change. And when you see a change happening, and not only change, we did legislative change. That's why when you say law, I'm like, because we spent so much time working to. It's not easy to change the law. It's not. I mean, it's really hard. So when you get there, you really want to make sure it's implemented. So what is giving me hope is that I think we are riding a wave of change. All of us. I said it already, and I think we all did. The fact that we are here, that we are talking about this topic informed. I mean, we are all part of the process that is leading to hopefully better tomorrow. Having shared all the depressing numbers, finishing on a high note. But just the last point. I really do. I don't want to use overused terms, but this kind of collaboration. I'm really excited by this panel, and I would really like to talk all of you here, because it is in this kind of collaborations of not so usual suspects cooperating. Right? I come from the international development, and yet I really think I can contribute to the ESG discussion and agenda. And these kind of sparks, when you see them in action, I think that's what's giving me hope. Yeah. And thank you for inviting. I will not keep the microphone or take it more.
Yeah, and to tie on to what you've said first with the investment in companies led by men, I think it's important also to get women and start focused when they're young, to get them into engineering and tech and the businesses that people invest in. And in a good way, of course. It's not because I know that sometimes there's such a large focus on the girls that the boys actually feel excluded. So that's not the point either. But to sort of to have them involved from the start at a young age, because sometimes boys and girls can have different interests, and there might be different reasons for that. But it could also be some social aspects to it. I am. I'm mainly working on human rights, also anti-corruption, but human rights, and it is challenging, and all the sustainability topics are complex. But I'm positive because, as I said previously, before when we talked about sustainability, it was mainly environment, or actually climate, CO reduction only almost. And now actually we do talk more about gender equality, we talk more about human rights, labor rights, indigenous people, and freedom of speech. And when we talk about AI, we do talk about privacy issues. And so I think the discussion is a bit broader now, and it's a bit more comprehensive, and I think that's a good thing. And I think there are now more companies that see sustainability as the business. Sustainability is our business. It's not only one person working at sustainability department. So Helena.
Poor Helena.
Yeah, so I think that is positive. And legislation, of course, is not easy when we have a tsunami of legislation, which is the case right now. It's not easy for a large company to comply with all that, but there is a push. So
Yes.
I am positive, but we need to avoid also the checkbox attitude towards that. Of course, we need to actually really want to make a change and go beyond compliance. And but still, I'm seeing a positive development now, just the recent years. So I hope that will continue.
So I will repeat that I think a lot of hope lies in the city. So you can see that a lot of investments still in fossil energy in US and China are heading in that direction. But still the cities as LA and Beijing are all really reducing their amount and also banning fossil fuels for the future. So you can see that we have regulations in cities that are much more ambitious when it comes to climate policies. And also I had a meeting last week with a lot of cities in Ukraine, and the topic was rebuild cities in a green and sustainable way, and they could actually showcase really concrete presentations how energy efficiency and clean solutions and electricity. So it was great to see all the ambitions. And for us, I mean, as a city of Stockholm, we actually for 4 years during when I was a mayor, we reduced CO2 emissions per person by 20%. And some say, like, why should we do so much when we already do a lot, kind of. Others said, like, this will be super expensive. Others said, like, this is impossible. But then I always think, like, I would like to, like, the takeaway that one of the key architects of the Paris Agreement said, impossible is just not a fact, it's an attitude. And I think that, like, this is actually now, we can all make a change and we can all actually contribute to real impact. And that in mind, with that attitude, I think there's a lot of hope in that.
Just to say here something that I heard like a few weeks ago. We were in this discussion with sustainability professionals, and one of the sustainability managers, she was like, my boss asked me, what is your ultimate, goal in your position? And she was like, to cease to exist as a sustainability manager. It was like, why? And she was like, it's not normal that in a whole big organization is one person. When it comes to sustainability, we go to one person. It has to be, everyone has to be a sustainability manager. And by that point, I cease to exist. My position should be a kind of like absurd and not necessary, because everybody will act that way. And I think we already see signs of that, because we hear sustainability everywhere. We hear people talking about it, politicians in different arenas. We hear sustainability, which is good and can be also a bad thing, because then it's kind of like there is also opponents of that who says, like, you shouldn't have everybody, it's kind of like dilutes the discussion, or kind of like doesn't lead anywhere, because you have this kind of like different and competing kind of like opinions, and it's not going to lead to a fruitful kind of like something. So I think I still have hope in having everybody on board, and I can see signs of that. There is also signs of buzzwords, or all this kind of like, we should, as you said, look like the good person, and but also it's a whole change going on. It's a whole change, and of course there is always challenges. And I also have hope in the. I think we are all millennials somehow, but if you look at Gen Zs, it's a major topic for them. It's a major thing for them. It's a major kind of like detail whenever in their behavior, when they buy things. So I think that is also a hopeful thing. Yeah. We can see it in our kids. We can see it in younger people, and I think it's. I think my hope lies there. Yeah. Yes. If I may say. Yeah.
Thank you. For of you. Thank you so much. This is perfect. So yes. So we. Maybe I'll turn. So we stay with the message that's but hope is active, right? Because you're saying you're doing this, you're going against the wave, but then you know that it's towards the greater good. So, yes, so we keep on going. Yes. Thank you so much. I mean, thank you. Thank you for today, everyone. And thank you those that are looking at us. And find us out. Maybe we're going to post this video soon for everyone that was here. And thank you for Impact Day. Yes. Oh, yes, maybe a photo. Oh, we got so many. I would really like one. Maybe Rodrigo, can you take one? Tons of photos. Can I have one? I'm gonna do my phone as well.